Imagine this. You get an alert from the government saying that you have 90 days to get out of your state before it's completely covered in water. What's happening? Where do you go? Follow me down the rabbit hole to find out. Hi friends, welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host Dani, and today we are talking about the Doomsday Map that Forbes put out. Actually, they put it out in 2017, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. This was submitted to me by my friend. Thank you, Paige, for pointing this out. It kind of goes with this whole Great Reset food shortage thing, kind of along the same lines. So basically, according to Forbes magazine, well, let me start over. There is an article by Forbes that was put out in 2017, and they're kind of going over this like futuristic visionaries clues to planet changes and things that are coming. So basically, Gordon-Michael Scallion was a futuristic teacher of consciousness studies and metaphysicist and spiritual visionary. In the 80s, he claimed that a spiritual awakening that helped him create very detailed maps of the future world were all stemming from like this cataclysmic pole shift. So basically, like our north and south poles were going to shift, and there was going to be a bunch of flooding all around the world. Like terrible, terrible floods. And a lot of this, I'm going to read straight from this article. All of this information I'm getting straight out of this Forbes article. I will obviously link it into our show notes. What happened was my friend, she sent me this TikTok, which this is going all over TikTok. People are freaking out about this like Doomsday Map. NASA basically saw this guy. They saw this Doomsday Map, and they were like, yeah, this guy's like a nut job. This isn't real, blah, blah, blah. But I love to not believe the government because they're always putting out things that don't make, like, to try to not get the public to panic. They put out things where they're like, we're just going to, like, calm this down a little bit. Even if it's true, they won't tell you until, like, last minute. So there have been a lot of questions asked about, like, if a meteor hit, the Earth, a big enough meteor, could it shift the poles and then this flooding happen? Well, apparently, according to NASA, no. But according to a couple other people, it could happen. So some of this stuff, like just to kind of explain what they're talking about, like where the water is going to be, I'm going to read it straight from the article. You guys can go and read the article if you want. Check out our Instagram. I'm going to share these pictures just because it's really hard to explain just in like a podcast format where there's no longer going to be land, where there's going to be more land, and like what's flooded, what's not. So I'm going to explain the best I can, obviously, but a lot of that's going to be, pulled straight from this article because he did a very good job. One of the biggest things that is pointed out in this article is that a lot of these, so NASA obviously came out and was like, no way, this is not true, this couldn't happen, blah, blah, blah. Look at the whole history of all the world. It's never happened before, right? And you're like, okay, maybe NASA's got a point. Well, then you start looking at these billionaires. And we talked about a couple of these guys last week. Well, we talked about John Malone last week. Well, you have all these billionaires that are buying up land in like basically undesirable places. Obviously, John Malone, he is the largest landowner in America. He owns 2.2 million acres and mostly in Wyoming and Colorado. Ted Turner owns 2 million acres in Montana, Nebraska, New Mexico, North Dakota. Philip, I want to say it's Ann Schultz. Owns 434,000 acres in Wyoming. Jeff Bezos owns 400,000 acres in Texas. And Stan Kroenke, That sounds good. Owns 225,162 acres in Montana and have all amassed, like, really big plots of land, all these guys. And they have a lot of billionaires are prepping for basically future escape to these, like, vacation homes in remote locations, which I don't know, maybe they really just want to live in remote locations, but also most of the time when people go on vacations or have vacation homes, it's like in the mountains where they can go skiing or like snowmobiling or on a coast somewhere where they can go, you know, enjoy the water on a lake. I mean, I would love to have a lake vacation home because my husband and I like to wakeboard. So let's go to the lake to do that, right? And I prefer freshwater over saltwater, but that's just my preference. Well, there are a lot of people that own a lot of land and a lot of vacation homes in like just very odd places. And don't get me wrong. Wyoming, Colorado, Montana, these places are beautiful places. Parts of Texas can be really beautiful. Parts of Texas are, I think, more deserty. I don't know. I've been to Texas once. But, like there's definitely some really cool places. And maybe they just really like the view of the mountains, or they live in the mountains or something like that. They own, obviously, John Malone, we talked about with the food shortages. And last week, we talked about how he owns a lot of cattle ranches. And so it makes sense that he would own land in Colorado and Wyoming. A lot of people don't think that Colorado's known for cattle ranches, but it is. You just come here for the weed and the skiing. But guess what? We also make some food. In fact, fun fact about Denver, we actually hold the National Western Stock Show here, and it's been going since 1906. And people from all over the country, obviously, but all over Colorado for sure, they bring their cows. There's a huge rodeo. It's a really cool thing. So if you're ever here during January time frame, you want to check that out, there you go. Anyway, that's not what this is about. This is about this Doomsday Map. So what's going on here? Okay, hypothetically, right? Like, because we are constantly working in hypotheticals because, the experts out there always shut us down. They think, we're a little cuckoo. Whatever, maybe we are. It's fine. So, hypothetically, if for whatever reason our world was hit by this huge asteroid and it shifted like the poles, right? So now North Pole, South Pole, everything's weird. Things are going weird, right? Well, according to Gordon-Michael Scallion and Edgar Casey and others, there's a map of the world and a lot of things are gone. We're going to start with Africa because that's what the article starts with. Africa will ultimately be divided into 3 parts. So the Nile will widen significantly. This is all a quote straight out of the article, by the way. A brand new waterway will split the entire area from the Mediterranean Sea towards Gabon. And as the Red Sea enlarges, Cairo will ultimately disappear into the sea. The majority of Madagascar will also be taken by the sea. New land will then rise in the Arabian Sea. A new landmass will develop to the north and west of Cape Town, and new mountain ranges will emerge above ground in the area. Lake Victoria will merge with Lake Nyasa, I hope I said that right, and flow into the Indian Ocean. Central Eastern Africa's coastlines will be completely inundated by water. So Africa's going to look a lot different. Basically, on the west coast of Africa, you're going to have like almost a little bit of an outline of what it was, but it's just like a line down the coast. And then there's a bunch of water. There's like a big blob in the middle. And then down the east coast, it's fatter, but like still another line down the coast. Madagascar is like super skinny now. I mean, there wasn't a lot there to begin with, but now it's mostly gone. So that's Africa. That's really exciting. Basically gone. And it was huge. I mean, Africa, it's huge. Asia. This heavily seismic region will have the most severe and dramatic earth changes. Land will be inundated from the Philippines to Japan and north of the Bering Sea, including the Kuril and Sakhalin Islands. As the Pacific plate shifts its position 9 degrees, the islands of Japan will eventually sink, leaving only a few small islands. Taiwan and most of Korea will be completely lost to the sea. The entire coastal region of China will be pushed inland hundreds of miles. Indonesia will break up, however. Some islands will remain and new land will emerge. The Philippines will disappear completely beneath the sea. Asia will lose a significant amount of its landmass through these dramatic changes. However, entirely new landmass will eventually be created. That is kind of what they keep going back to in this. It's like, with this giant change in the earth, a lot of the land that we know now will not be there any longer. However, some new land is going to be there. Like, places where there's not land right now, and we're going to get into a huge one at the very end. The place where there's not land right now, there will be land, but places where millions of people are living in China, like most of those coastal, hundreds of miles inland, like most of China is gone. So, that sucks. And Japan is mostly gone. There's a lot happening over here in Asia.
Did you know that over 40% of Americans have a hard time swallowing pills? So when it's time to take your vitamins, large capsules and pills are out of the question. We know that gummy vitamins exist, but they're full of sugar, they get stuck in your teeth, and they only contain a fraction of the nutrients you need. Luckily, Easy Melts has discovered the ultimate vitamin sweet spot. Vitamins that melt in your mouth, taste like a treat, and are packed with nutrients ready for absorption, all without an ounce of sugar. For a limited time, Easy Melts is giving listeners a free 3-month supply of vitamin D3 with their first purchase. To claim your free D3 vitamins, visit try.easymelts.com/spring24. That's try.melts.com/spring24. Say goodbye to the old way of taking your vitamins and say hello to the easy way.
Let's go into India a little bit. Due to extreme land buckling and lowering the elevation of the country, the population of India will be told not to seek higher ground within the interior country, but to head to the Himalayas, to Tibet and Nepal and China, or the higher mountains that are officially with Indian territory. The concern I have here is if, like, the Indian people go to China, all the Chinese people are trying to head thousands, hundreds of miles inland, so there might not be a lot of space for a lot of people in China. So if you're Indian, you're listening to this, and you're looking for a safe place to go, the Himalayas, Tibet, Nepal, I think those are good options. I guess it depends where you're at in India, kind of like, what your situation looks like. But China might be a little tricky, so think about that. Antarctica will become fertile, soil-rich, and farming territory. New land will be created from the Antarctic Peninsula to Tierra del Fuego and east towards South Georgia Island. So that's kind of cool. Because, we still need to farm. We still need to feed the people. Like, I'm imagining that a lot of people are going to die in this situation. I'm imagining that, a lot of people are trying to flee where there's going to be water. Not everybody's going to be able to flee, but also when the asteroid actually hits the Earth, I think it's going to cause, quite a bit of, damage. Is what I'm imagining, this would look like if/when it happens. That's what I'm imagining. Let's talk about Australia. Australia will lose nearly 25% of its land due to coastal flooding. The Adelaide area will become a new sea all the way north towards Lake Erie. The Simpson and Gibson deserts will eventually become fertile farming land. Entirely new communities will develop between the Great Sandy and Simpson deserts, and new refugee settlements will be created in Queensland. New land will also be created off the coast. When you see these pictures, and I will post them to our Instagram, when you see these pictures, basically the island of Australia is smaller. It's a little shrunken because all the coast has been, I don't know, on the map it's half an inch in, but that's a lot of miles. Half an inch in on basically all the way around. But right to the south of Australia, there's a giant second island now. So, yeah, Australia's just kind of split into two. This land wasn't there before, so it's new land. New Zealand is totally different too. New Zealand will grow in size and will once again join the land of old Australia. New Zealand will quickly become the glory land and ultimately become one of the fastest areas excuse me, one of the safest areas in the entire world. New Zealand grew by a lot, like tripled in size, and is now like kind of in a J shape. And the swoop of the J comes up to connect to Australia. I want to apologize. My dog is snoring really loudly in the background, so if you can hear him, he's always here when I record. They don't let me record by myself, which is kind of obnoxious, but it's either like you hear his snoring or you hear him like whining outside my door. So, pros and cons. My dog is snoring. Maybe I'll post a picture of him so you guys can all appreciate him as well. Anyway, let's move on here. Europe. Okay, if you're in Europe, it's time to get out because things are not looking good for you. Europe will experience the fastest and most serious earth changes. Most of northern Europe will sink beneath the sea as the tectonic plate underneath it collapses. Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark will be all disappear and will eventually create hundreds of small islands. Most of the United Kingdom, from Scotland to the English Channel, will disappear underneath the sea. Several small islands will remain. Major cities like London and Birmingham will be among the remaining islands. Much of Ireland will disappear beneath the sea except for the higher ground areas. Russia will be separated from Europe by an entirely new sea when the Caspian, Black, Kara, and Baltic seas combined. The new sea will stretch all the way from the Yenisei River in Siberia. I'm butchering a lot of these names, just like I apologize. I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. The area's climate will remain safe, leaving Russia to supply most of Europe's food. The Black Sea will merge with the North Sea as well, leaving Bulgaria and Romania completely underwater. Certain areas of western Turkey will go underwater, creating a new coastline from Istanbul to Cyprus. Much of Central Europe will sink, and most of the land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Baltic Sea will be completely lost underwater. The majority of France will go underwater, leaving an island in the area surrounding Paris. A completely new waterway will then separate Switzerland from France, creating a line from Geneva to Zurich. Italy will be entirely divided by water. Venice, Naples, Rome, and Genoa will I lost my spot. Excuse me. Will sink below the rising sea. Higher elevations will be created as new islands. New lands will rise from Sicily to Sardinia. So, if you live in Europe, like I'm looking at this picture, it's not great for you. Like, it's not looking good. There's not like a lot of land left. And if all Europeans are trying to flee to these couple cities that are still going to be above land, like it's just not going to work. There's just not going to be enough land for all the people of Europe to flee to these couple islands. Don't worry though, because there's going to be a whole new island that you should all flee to because we're going to be very curious about it. We're not there yet though. We're going to get into North America. Canada. Parts of the Northwest region will be pushed in almost 200 miles. Regions of Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and areas of Alberta will become the refuge/survival center of Canada. Most migrations into the region will arrive from British Columbia and Alaska because there's going to be a lot gone from those areas. A lot is going to be underwater there. The United States. As the North American plate buckles, the new islands of California will be created with almost 150 islands. The West Coast will recede east towards Nebraska, Wyoming, and Colorado. The Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway will join and continue through the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico. All coastal areas from Maine to Florida will be taken over by water and pushed inland for miles. I'm obviously looking at all these maps. So basically, like up until the mountains in Washington, you have the Cascades. Everything like west of the mountains gone. So if you're in Washington State, move east. Oregon is mostly completely gone. Nevada's gone. Half of Arizona's gone. California is obviously like they said, has a couple islands. Half of Colorado is gone. Honestly, I'm surprised by this because basically the water comes up and over the Rocky Mountains. So I'm surprised that, Utah is mostly gone. The Rocky Mountains that separate Utah and Colorado, it's like right there on the border. They are underwater. However, the ones like the Rocky Mountains go up into Canada and kind of go down further. That's all still there. So it's just in this little area, Colorado into Wyoming a bit, but not much, is underwater. So basically, I now have ocean view from where everyone in Denver is looking at the ocean now. I did not buy land, with a view of the ocean, but I might have a view of the ocean. Who knows? The Mississippi River has widened like a lot. Half of Louisiana is gone. New Orleans, I'm sorry. If you live in New Orleans, yeah, you're screwed there. Parts of Missouri, parts of Illinois, the Great Lakes obviously are completely flooded, and all rivers running in and out of the Great Lakes are completely flooded. Actually, on the east coast of the United States, it's not so bad. You do have some flooding on the east coast, but not as bad as I would anticipate. Really, the west coast is where it's going to be really, really bad. And we're going to get into Mexico next, but the west coast of Mexico looks pretty rough too. Mexico says most coastal areas of Mexico will be inundated far inland. The California Baja coast will ultimately become a series of islands. Much of the Yucatan Peninsula will be lost to the rising waters. Central America and the Caribbean. Central America will sink and will be reduced to a series of islands. Higher elevations will be considered safe. A new waterway will eventually develop from the Bay of Honduras to Salinas, Ecuador. The Panama Canal will ultimately become cut off with no access. South America. In South America, heavy earthquake and volcanic activity will take place. Venezuela, Colombia, and Brazil will be taken over by water. The Amazon basin area will become a huge inland sea. Peru and Bolivia will be sink with rising waters. That doesn't make sense, but that's what's written. Anyway, Salvador, Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and parts of Uruguay will sink below the sea, and so will the Falkland Islands. An entirely new sea will rise to take over much of central Argentina. A huge landmass which will include another new inland sea will develop and join up with the land of Chile. Yeah, there is like a huge part of land, like a huge piece of land that has risen out of the sea right off the coast of South America. But yeah, South America looks pretty rough too. Man, everything looks a lot worse than it does right now. But also, we're used to looking at the map the way that we look at the map. So if this does actually happen, then it's going to be pretty dramatic. Here's what they never mention. It's not mentioned once in this Forbes article, but I see it on all the maps. On the map of, North America, there's a map here of Europe. There it is. There's a map on the map of Africa. You can see a little tiny bit. There's a huge landmass in between where the United States is and where Europe is. It's right below Greenland. It is kind of just right off the coast of Portugal, basically. Right off the coast of Portugal and right off the coast of, the United States East Coast. There's a huge piece of land that's not once mentioned. However, on all these maps on here, it's labeled, guess what it is? Atlantis. So you're telling me that this giant meteor is going to hit the Earth, the poles are going to shift, a bunch of our land's going to disappear, some more land's going to appear, but some of that appearing land is Atlantis, the lost city of Atlantis, but it's not a city, it's an entire continent. This is a lost continent of Atlantis. And maybe they just named it Atlantis because like it doesn't really fit with either country or either continent. Like it's kind of in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Maybe that's why they called it Atlantis. However, why would you name it that? Because everyone's been searching for Atlantis, right? Like we all want to know. There's a Disney movie about it. You know, there's so many myths and legends and people are searching for it and all these things. Why would you name it that if that's not what it is? So anyway, there's this Doomsday Map. It's from 2017. You can read the whole thing. I'm going to link to it. This is the only source for this episode because I went straight to the source from the TikTok. The lady was talking about it and I was like, well, let's just go straight to that. There's plenty of TikToks. If that's what you're into, you can look it up. Thank you, Paige, for sending me this suggestion for this Doomsday Map. I hadn't heard about it. I'm surprised by it. So if you live on any coast anywhere in the entire world, you're basically screwed right now. Not right now. This is going to happen in 2050. So you have some years. You have like 28 years to really enjoy it. However, I would say like don't push your luck. It hits 2040, 2045. You better start thinking about moving inland to the great Midwest that everyone doesn't like. Guess what? If you're European, I would start moving. I would move anywhere. Move to Russia. Move anywhere. Get away. Get out of Europe in 2045 because, you know, maybe it comes a little earlier. Maybe it comes late. Maybe it comes in 2055. Who knows? All I'm saying is it's just really odd that they, first of all, like that this guy had this thought that an asteroid, like such a giant asteroid, could potentially hit the Earth, which it can. Obviously, we know that the poles could shift, and then he created full maps. And just the fact that, like, where did he get how does he know? I have more questions for this. I'm going to see if I can, message him. I have more questions for him. Like, how did he figure out, like, what parts were going to be underwater? Did he just look at, like, elevation? But also, if you're just looking at elevation, I don't know, like, Florida's pretty low, but most of Florida's still not underwater. I'm just very confused by how he decided what regions, what areas were going to be underwater, and how he decided, Atlantis was just going to, like, magically pop out of water. I don't know. I'm curious. I have more questions. So I hope you guys have more questions too. I love to leave you guys questioning more than what you came in with, because that's my job basically at this point. So what do you guys think? I love to hear from you. If you have suggestions, please send them in. I will cover them. She literally sent this to me like the day after the last episode dropped. So I jumped on it. I was like, yep, let's do it right now. I'm going to go ahead and put this episode out this week. Next week, I have a really good episode about water. We're kind of on this theme. We did the food shortages. We're doing the Great Reset. This Doomsday Map is kind of on theme. So we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about some water next week, which all these things are kind of starting to freak me out a little bit. So anyway, until next week, my friends, stay skeptical. And I hope you guys have a beautiful week. I'll see you soon. The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Dani Mercy. We thrive on listeners like you. If you like what you're hearing, please leave us a rating or review wherever you are listening. Follow us on Instagram at rabbit.holepodcast. Special thank you to Zakar Valaha Music for our intro.